Introducing Yoga Plus. Download now for free. Available on the App Store and Google Play.
Hello and welcome to the WellnessPlus podcast. I'm your host, Karina Rachel, and I'm joined today by Dr. Nisha Khanna. She is an MD with a focus on functional medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. And you're here to talk to us today about weight loss, or perhaps weight management, because so many people are either focused on losing weight or focused on trying to gain weight. In our previous interview talking about Ayurvedic medicine, these concepts of food combining, intermittent fasting, cleansing the body came up, and I really wanted to just kind of delve into those topics. Can you maybe start by talking about your diet, the way that you eat?
Okay, sure. And so, one thing I will say is in defining weight loss, it's more about optimal weight for someone's particular body type and where they are in that phase of their life. And so, for example, a child, you want them to, they're in the Kapha stage of life, you want them to be building. An elderly person, they're in the Vata stage of life and the air space element, and they could actually deal with, retaining a bit more weight. And I think it's more in this young adulthood, Pitta stage of our life, kind of age 15 to 60, where we're so concerned about weight loss. And honestly, a big part of it is due to toxicity. And so we accumulate toxicity, whether it's through injuries to the microbiome or through the foods we eat or the food combining or not eating appropriately for our dosha or at the particular appropriate time of the day that lead to this cumulative imbalance. And so then we're stuck in our young adulthood Pitta stage of life, really trying to lose the weight. Whereas it really depends on where you are in life, like what is the optimal weight for you, and also what your constitution is, whether that be Kapha, Vata, Pitta. So whether you're more predominant earth element, fire element, or air and space element.
Interesting.
And so you asked what my diet is right now? Okay, so I'm age 40, and so I'm in my Pitta stage of life, and we're in Vata Kapha season because it's fall, winter, and I'm noticing that both my Vata and Kapha are a little out of balance. And so I usually check that through my pulse, and so we can get a lot of information through checking with 3 fingers on the pulse. And so I'm staying in tune with what's going on with me, every few days. And so currently then I'm modifying my diet according to the current imbalances, or what we call Vikruti. And so what that looks like for me is having kapha reducing foods. So that's following everything that would be on a kapha favor list. So things that are less building to the body. So lower glycemic index, lower carbohydrates, maybe favoring something like quinoa or tapioca instead of wheat. Avoiding dairy, because dairy is very building on the body. It's predominant in the earth and water element. And so that you think about those elements as being dense, so you don't want to build more density. And so I'm favoring that type of diet, less sweet taste, because the sweet taste is also predominant in earth and water element, and but I'm preparing those foods in more of a Vata promoting way, or Vata reducing way, I should say. And so Vata is cold and dry, it's the air element, and so balancing that out with warm and soupy. So having kapha foods in a Vata preparation is good for this season, and it's also good for my current personal imbalances.
Very interesting. And, based on our last discussion, one of the kind of, undertones that kept coming up is this idea that you don't necessarily look for a one-size-fits-all solution to everything, but really recognize that the problems or symptoms that we may be facing are very personal to us. And so you had talked about you have your intrinsic composition?
Constitution.
Constitution. And then also the more, I guess, environmental piece, or what is going on with us now. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe how people, I don't know, I guess how that looks for somebody who is struggling with their weight in one way or another?
Yeah, so the weight in general, the way I look at it is it is an excess of kapha in the body, so earth and water element. And so you want to avoid foods that are rich in those elements. So anything with the sweet taste, sour taste is also really dense, salty, and it's because of the elemental composition of those tastes. And so for someone who has a kapha predominance, there's long lists of foods that someone should avoid or favor that are available on the internet. What I typically do to just simplify it for people is say avoid gluten, dairy, and sugar, because those are things that are very prevalent in our diet, but are also very promoting for kapha. And so I'll look at weight loss from that perspective of what constitution is out of balance, and it's the kapha dosha. However, there's also a huge component of ama, or toxicity. And so ama is something that accumulates anytime we don't digest something perfectly. So if our digestion's overwhelmed because we overate, or because we had a big glass of ice water with the meal, or because we were multitasking while we were eating, and so our energy was directed at multiple things and not on the task of eating, or if we're really stressed out overall. So these are things that lead to improper digestion. And what's also interesting is that ama is also any emotional toxicity that accumulates. So that's anything that isn't processed into conscious understanding and love. And so any emotion that is not processed to that is toxicity, and it is thought to lodge energetically within the body. And so the same thing is true of food, is that its ultimate destination is supposed to be consciousness. So you're supposed to take your food, it's got all these nutrients, but the ultimate phase of digestion is consciousness of the cells. So the cells feel alive and they feel part of a cohesive whole. And so when I'm looking at obesity or inappropriate body weight for that person at that time of their life, I'm looking at it from those two perspectives of the toxicity and mitigating that within the body, as well as balancing the constitution that's out of balance.
Very interesting. So you had mentioned things like drinking ice water with a meal. Can you talk a little bit more about why you would recommend against drinking those cold beverages?
Yeah, so one of the fastest ways to lose weight is to just switch the temperature of the liquids that you are consuming.
Wow.
And so it's become very popular. I think a lot of people are doing it to start their day with a cup of warm water before they eat or drink anything else, and it provides a flush for the body, so a flush for your digestion. And this is, not scientifically proven, but it's an Ayurvedic concept that I think has been adapted into our society, and people feel good with it, so they're doing it and promoting it. And some people add a little squeeze of lemon or some apple cider vinegar. In Ayurveda, apple cider vinegar and honey, honey in particular has a quality called lekana, which is, it scrapes. And so honey, not in large doses, but like a teaspoon of uncooked raw honey, actually is thought to scrape fat and help you eliminate that toxicity from the body. So I say uncooked and raw because in Ayurveda, cooked honey, so pasteurized honey, is actually thought to create toxicity. So it's a really important distinction. If you want to help your body detox, have the uncooked raw honey and avoid the processed pasteurized honey. So starting your day with a cup of warm water, either adding a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and a teaspoon of honey, that's kind of a supercharged way to promote your ideal body weight and eliminate the ama, the toxicity. And then having no more than a cup of warm liquid with each meal, and then drinking, kind of hydrating and drinking your water in between meals. And the idea is that, say we have our stomach with all these digestive enzymes and food, you don't want to dilute out your enzymes by flooding the digestion with liquid. It also is overwhelming for this distended stomach to be sloshing around with a lot of liquid. The cold quality creates some vasoconstriction or constriction of the blood vessels in the stomach, and we have a splanchnic blood supply, which is its primary function is to direct blood to the digestion when it's time to rest and digest. And so when you throw some cold water on it, you're actually causing that constriction to happen, so that you don't absorb the nutrients and they don't digest appropriately, and anything undigested becomes ama, toxicity, that then can be absorbed by the body, and then in response the body holds on to fat and water in order to dilute that toxicity out.
Wow. And then kind of on the same track of the warm soups. I love a bowl of warm soup, and I think it's fascinating how healing that it can be as well. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah. So essentially, anything that you can do to take your food that is on your plate and get it closer to what your body actually has to use as a liquid that moves through. It's called chyme. It's actually the liquid that moves from the small intestine and through the small intestine into the large intestine. And so if that liquid, anything you can do to facilitate that process. So, for example, when you blend your food or when you blend it into a soup, you're making it so easy on your body. I mean, you don't have to chew it, which makes it easier on you. But and I'm not promoting like all your food should be liquid, but warm cooked soupy helps the food to digest more easily, so that digestive energy can be reserved for other processes within the body. Maybe it gives you an energy boost throughout the day, or it keeps your energy levels up throughout the day, or it prevents sort of that slump, right? So anytime someone overeats, you see them kind of sleeping on the couch, right?
The food coma.
Yeah, and so it's essentially they overwhelmed their digestive capacity. They created a lot of ama, which then they're gonna, have to get rid of at some point. Otherwise, it's just going to accumulate within the tissues, maybe lead to a cold, or to other pathologies that are kind of more severe. And so the body is essentially overwhelmed, and your energy supplies have been redirected. Whereas when you eat warm cooked soupy food and you lighten your digestion, and that could be by actually doing an intermittent fast or fasting for half of a day or a full day a week, then you give your digestion a break so it can start to digest anything that wasn't completely digested in the past to pure consciousness, to love and understanding.
Interesting. And then, there's so many different dietary approaches now. I would love to just kind of get your opinion on them. So I guess maybe we start with paleo.
Okay, sure. So paleo's appropriate for different people at different times, right? So I will guide patients through a paleo type diet if they have a lot of dysbiosis, because essentially dysbiosis is an overgrowth of harmful organisms within the gut, because it's going to starve out those organisms, a paleo type diet. So I think that's probably why it's been so popular, is because dysbiosis is really prevalent within our population. And so people feel a lot better on it, and they have the weight loss and those sorts of things. It might not be the best long-term diet for somebody, but I think in conjunction with appropriate cleansing through herbs, it really can be useful.
Interesting. And so largely paleo, we're just talking about reducing the wheat, the starches, the gluten, which you had mentioned a moment ago as well.
Yeah, and it's really good for the kapha type of diet, for the kapha constitution, because they already have enough of that earth and water element, so they don't need more of it for the most part, in the form of carbohydrates. They've got enough of that sort of grounding, heavy quality to their innate constitution. So I think a paleo diet would actually be really good for a kapha type of for a kapha constitution or a kapha imbalance. And what's really interesting too is a lot of what traditional medical doctors see coming into their medical practice, the diabetes, high blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, these are kapha disorders. And so heart disease, these are things that will benefit from a paleo diet. And then, paleo can also be really helpful in autoimmune conditions, which has more of the pitta inflammatory aspect to it. I think the one constitution a paleo diet might not be very good for is the vata type, because they're air and space, so they really do need the grounding of carbohydrates.
Interesting. And again, kind of going back to that idea that there's no one-size-fits-all recommendation for everyone. And then so veganism. What's your take on that as a diet? Is that something that is beneficial for people?
Well, I mean, there's so much research in both camps, and I used to work at Whole Foods as their primary doctor for their employees for about 2 years, and it was a heavy plant-based, low-fat plant-based protocol for a lot of the patients. And it's interesting to see the studies and the research and the clinical cases where people who had diabetes with hemoglobin A1Cs of 11 come down to 7 on a low-fat plant-based diet. So again, I think it's depending on what condition exists. One thing I will say is just don't be a junk food vegan, because I think still it's really important to eat organic and to eat unprocessed, something as much in its natural form. So if you're going for a lot of meat simulated foods, so whether that's like soy hamburger patties and fake cheese and then it's becoming ultra processed, and you want to eat something that's in its natural form as much as possible, whole grain if you're doing grains, and as close to what had existed in nature. And so I think that veganism is appropriate in a lot of situations. And what I also really like about it is that if someone is really wanting to magnify their journey on their spiritual path, a lot of the Ayurvedic thought is about Sattvic food. So Sattvic means creating more peace and calmness within the body. And so meat has more of a tamasic quality, which is heavy, grounding, and we can understand that from just the qualities of the dense protein. So if someone is trying to sort of connect more with the ethereal realm and have meditations where they leave their body, they actually want to lighten the body, so they don't want to introduce anything with denseness to it. So it's nothing, it's not a commentary on you can't be spiritual if you eat meat, because I feel like meat has its place in terms of grounding and supporting the processes in a lot of bodies, and it's also very dependent on someone's heritage and what their ancestry is like and what foods they can tolerate really well and do well with. So it definitely has its place, and it's very nourishing. So things like bone broth can be very building, both in functional medicine and in Ayurveda, for gut healing, as well as to really nourish the deeper nervous system tissues and things like that. So I'm not saying one is less spiritual than the other, but it's more about having more of those transcendental experiences and not being weighed down by your food. That it's easier to sort of sit in meditation and commune with the divine when your body is light. And so this concept actually goes back into biblical times too, where there would be fasts on just lentils and rice for a period of time before a significant event or celebration or kind of commemorative, Interesting.
So, taking that concept and maybe looking at the typical diets that people are eating, where unfortunately I think a lot of the kind of average American diet is very heavy in meats, very heavy in processed foods. What is the impact of that type of diet on our health and maybe emotional well-being?
Yeah, I don't think that people need a lot of meat. Most people don't. Usually the protein requirements are kind of inflated for what the body actually needs, and it is different person to person and also depending on what activities you're doing. But yeah, processed foods are incredibly harmful to your gut bacteria. If you think about just in terms of the consciousness within that food, right? So it's been sitting on a shelf in a grocery store. There's very little prana or life force in it compared to an apple, So a box of crackers versus an apple. Like when you're really tired, I know that I would go for the apple. There have been times where I was just so tired and I could barely get up, but I could reach for an apple and then I would feel better. And I don't think it had to do with the sugar in the apple, but more that it has life force. It just came off of a tree, and that might not be the case when fruit is like sitting in in crates for a whole year.
Right.
But it still has more prana than say like pasta.
Right.
And also things that can be sprouted, they still have life in them, so like a potato or lentils or seeds, they're still alive, so they might be sitting on a shelf, but they have that potential for life in them, whereas you can't do anything with pasta other than just boil it.
Right. And then do you have any thoughts on sprouted foods? Is it true that when you have sprouted foods, they actually contain more nutrients than the unsprouted version, or?
Well, so again, it's for which constitution. So sprouting can help eliminate some anti-nutrients and soaking foods as well, like soaking legumes and sprouting nuts. However, so if you think about sprouting, it creates a lot of air and space within that element, right? So within say you have a cup of beans and you sprout them, now they've all got like space between them and there's more of an airy light quality. So a Vata constitution, which is already predominant in air and space, might not do as well with sprouted food as say a Kapha constitution that's denser and needs more air and space.
So again, coming back to knowing the situation you're in, and then what is your recommendation for people who maybe want to try and determine which is their constitution and what imbalances they might have? Yeah,
so my go-to throughout Ayurvedic training, and it stayed the same, is Banyan Botanicals has a free quiz, and they're a supplier of a lot of organic Indian Ayurvedic herbs, and they do really good quality testing and control. And so you can go to their website, it's banyanbotanicals.com, and do a quick dosha quiz, but it is important to answer it 2 times. So one for what your current state is, and then one for what was true for you for most of your life. And that will give you your Vikruti and your Prakriti, which is your current imbalance, and then your kind of innate constitution. And in Ayurveda, health is bringing the imbalance closer to your innate constitution. And when that occurs, you're supposed to be in a more robust state of health.
Very good. You had mentioned earlier that when the body's accumulating excess weight, that is a response to accumulating toxicity, both chemical and emotional. What recommendation do you have for people to help encourage the body to release those toxins? Is going on an extreme diet or cleanse or detox something that you recommend?
Well, in Ayurveda, actually, regular fasting is recommended, and it varies based on the constitution. So this is maintenance work. If you really were going for more severe weight loss or a large amount of weight loss, then you would do more of a cleanse first and then do this maintenance. But the maintenance for kapha is to actually fast on, say, astringent liquid like a pomegranate juice or cranberry juice for a whole day, 1 day a week. For vata, though, the other end of the spectrum, they don't do well with fasting on just juice. And so they would do better with, say, fasting on maybe for half the day on broth, and then the other half of the day on warm cooked soup or lentils and rice. And then pitta is somewhere in the middle. They could probably do a day of being on some type of vegetable broth or vegetable soup. 1 day a week is maintenance. And then for regular detox, daily detox, so that's your weekly. And then daily detox, I usually really recommend some type of colon cleanse. And so this is your daily maintenance. And Triphala, which many people may be familiar with, is a nice tridoshic supplement that most people can take without any issue. And there's lots of different brands that carry it. I'd go for an organic variety and maybe start with 2 pills a day. I take mine in powder form, and I feel like it's what keeps me youthful and energetic, and it really has a lot of great qualities, a lot of antioxidants, and it just does a gentle daily detox. So a nice little sweep daily to clear up anything that may have built up over the day before. And then if you're going for more of an extreme weight loss, so you have 10 pounds to lose or 5 pounds to lose, doing an actual easy digestible food cleanse for anywhere from 3 to 7 to 9 days would be kind of a quick at-home easy way to do it. But there are many layers to it when you do it with a practitioner that involve kind of a bringing toxins that have lodged in the subcutaneous tissue and the subcutaneous fat, bringing those back to the GI tract for elimination, and then doing something that's going to evacuate the small intestine and the colon. So it's a bit more complex that you'd want to have guidance of a practitioner. But that's where you're going to see the really large weight loss or getting really close, the big hit to your ideal weight. And patients that I've guided that, with on such a cleanse, they may have been doing paleo or ketogenic for months and not seen the benefit, and then they did a cleanse like that, and within a couple weeks they lose 10 pounds. And it's because it's that ama weight, it's toxicity that our body is storing in fat and holding on to water to try to dilute it out and put it somewhere where it's not going to affect the kind of functioning of the central part of the body.
So getting into, that idea of like ketogenic diets, do you have a general response to, the ketogenic diet? I see that all the time now. I just wonder, is that something that is safe for most people?
Well, I have seen it work well for people, and they swear by it. It is really severe, so it might be something that could be beneficial for a period of time, but I don't know that I would recommend someone stay on it long term. And I really try to promote balance, the best thing about the ketogenic diet, I think, is the intermittent fasting. So I think grouping meals so that you're eating maybe 2 meals a day, 6 hours apart, and you're just having, that window, and then you give your digestion a long time to rest. That's probably the best thing about most ketogenic diets to me. And I usually recommend I feel like there's so many nutrients in vegetables and fruits and things that might have a higher carb glycemic content that I don't think I would recommend eliminating all of any category of food long term.
And that is definitely kind of my concern in a lot of these different dietary approaches, is that they do have these kind of extreme entire groups of foods that you're now suddenly, told not to eat. I think in general, there's maybe this concept of change, that our bodies are always in transition, so that we wouldn't just find this one way of eating and eat that way forever. So I love that you were kind of talking in one of the previous interviews that the Ayurvedic approach is really giving not only consideration to different times of the year, the different states you're in, what is your energetic demand like in terms of your exercise, your stress, so that you're really eating in a way that supports you in the position that you are now, rather than trying to just fit yourself into this certain diet or this certain way of eating because it's the fad or because it's working so well for someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that's really beautiful, is to recognize all of our individuality. We all have individual gifts to share with the world, individual purposes, contributions, and it's kind of silly to think that we should all eat the same because we're not the same in any other way. I don't think there's a prototype for any type of person or any type of life. Not everybody has to be married and have children, and have, this level of income or whatever to define their success. And success is something that, we can choose, and we're very individual on how we define our success. And I think it's important to celebrate all these unique parts of our body, as well as, not try to be a Kapha constitution and trying to look like a Vata. There's so much beauty to the steadiness and the shape and the curves of a Vata woman, for example. And yet most of our fashion and magazine culture is, you're only beautiful if you look tall and thin like a Vata constitution. And so as we're talking about weight loss, I think it's really important to not try to be fitting into someone else's mold in any way, whether that's body type, life purpose, or, what your life looks like, and really get to what is good for my body. Because I'm actually, my constitution is predominantly, my innate constitution is Pitta Kapha. And I had a big Vata imbalance for most of my teens and early 20s. And so I looked a certain way. I looked more kind of wafy, model-like. And it's been a transition for me to embrace like my new body, because my new body is my actual, closer to my actual innate constitution, and be like, wow, okay, there's beauty in this too. Like, it's not mainstream, but this is also, it's being in balance for your body type. That is beautiful, because I think we are drawn to balance. We're not necessarily drawn to beauty. We in our minds, we equate beauty with balance. And so a balanced Kapha is equally beautiful than a balanced Vata or a balanced Pitta, but it's the balance that we're drawn to, because our skin glows, our eyes shine, our light shows up in our life. We don't have the fatigue. We are energetic because we're getting good rest, and that happens when our constitution is balanced, and that's what's beautiful. And so one of the articles I wrote was something, I forget the title, it was a while ago, but it's something like beauty isn't skin deep. And so, the common saying, beauty is just skin deep. But it's the idea that when our hormones are balanced, when our gut is balanced, then we don't get acne, we don't get rashes, we don't get excess hair growth. Men don't get the balding, and women, have a curvier figure, or, whatever is appropriate for their constitution when their hormones are in balance. And so it's more that we are drawn to that inner beauty that comes from the health within the system and shines outward than we are to just the way something looks, And I've seen plenty of pictures of supermodels that are sticking their tongue out, and I'm looking at all the ama on their tongue, and I'm like, well, yeah, you're really beautiful on the outside, but I wouldn't want to kiss you, just because that's the toxicity on the tongue, It's and that's one of the big things that I like to stand for, is that it's not about how we look, it's about getting into balance and that inner beauty really shining from without. And that balance is not just how we look, but it's the inner beauty of feeling really good about ourselves and feeling like we are aligned with our purpose and our gifts to share, and that we are okay with being unique, and we're actually celebrating our uniqueness. And it's that beauty that I want to awaken within people so that they are shining that out into the world and then giving other people permission to shine theirs, you know?
And I love all of that you just said. I think for so many people, both men and women, there is that strong, external force towards looking this way or looking that way. But in many ways, the true experience for the person is that coming into balance that really makes us feel alive and beautiful. And a lot of times that doesn't necessarily fit into the mold that is maybe on the magazine covers or whatever. But people want to feel better. And I think that it's a tragedy in many ways that people perhaps mistake the external body as their way to feel better or to feel healthy or to feel that they're living their lives fully. So in many ways, it's this, maybe fixation on the physical appearance that maybe prevents them from actually finding that true source of happiness, and from which the glowing skin and healthy hair and all the little things that you kind of mentioned that are created when we bring our bodies into balance, that's what people are looking for. And they just don't realize that, trying to make your body look this way or look like this other person isn't actually the way to get you to that point. And there's probably a lot of, marketing on behalf of the different weight loss industries out there that kind of perpetuate that feeling. I'd love to kind of maybe recap some of the recommendations that you gave, starting the day with warm water. And then does it need to be, is room temperature okay? Or warm it a little bit on the stove?
Yeah, I definitely don't recommend using a microwave for anything other than maybe heating some moist warm compresses up.
Okay.
Definitely don't microwave your food or your liquids. But yeah, either a kettle or a stove. I'll usually just take a cup and put half room temperature water and half boiled water. And then it's usually a good drinking temperature for not tea drinking purposes, but just to kind of be that cleansing water. And I think warm is better than just room temperature.
Okay. And then you had said we can add lemon or apple cider vinegar and unprocessed honey, unpasteurized honey, which luckily here in Austin is actually easier to find. I know depending on where people live, it may be hard to find that unpasteurized honey. But luckily, thanks to the internet, we can find that pretty much, no matter where we are, we can find that. And then warm soups as a way to, prepare the body for digestion. So maybe warm soup before a meal.
Well, it would actually be your meal.
Okay.
So you would have maybe a bone broth for breakfast or a vegetable broth, or if you were more of a Vata constitution, you could have some oatmeal, warm cooked soup. A soupy type of food, and then maybe this is on a fasting day, then or it could be a cleanse day where you could have, say, khichdi, which is the rice and lentil combo spiced with vegetables. And that's actually quite filling. I mean, it's not before a meal, it's the actual meal. And you could do the same thing for dinner. And, some people get bored about eating the same thing for dinner. And that's if you're doing 3 meals a day. Some people will just be doing 2, depending on their constitution. But yeah, if you're doing, it's actually really nice for your digestion to be introduced to something and know what's coming next. And so if people are into batch cooking, I usually don't recommend leftovers for a lot of people beyond 24 to 48 hours. But say you make a pot of khichdi or lentil and rice mixture, then you can make that last by having it for 4 meals. So 2 days in a row have that mixture, and it will be really nice for your digestion to know what's coming, and also really nice for you to take the worry out of like what's for dinner. And you just made one batch and you had it for 2 days, but you had it for lunch and dinner both days.
Okay. And then I'm getting confused over what was the last one. What was this one?
The other is doing something like a Triphala tablets or powder as a gentle daily detox, fasting, depending on the right type of fast for your constitution, at least ideally 1 day a week, and then maybe kickstarting the process by doing a mini Ayurvedic cleanse and potentially adding in a functional cleanse before that Ayurvedic cleanse if you've got a lot of dysbiosis.
Right. And, it definitely sounds like there's a lot of benefit to someone, working with you so that you can actually help them stay really informed on where they are in terms of the imbalances. I believe it was in the previous podcast you had mentioned that when the body's out of balance, we'll actually crave things that will put us more out of balance. But when we are in balance, we'll crave the things that help to support that balance. And then I asked you something like, so how many people would you estimate are out of balance? And you were like, well, it's probably quite a lot. So helping people to understand where the cravings that they're having might actually help inform them of the imbalances they're experiencing.
Yeah. And that's one of the first things we talk about, because it's really just about education. Once someone knows that, that craving for crackers and popcorn isn't serving my insomnia and anxiety, then they're usually ready to make a switch, or at least try something for a week or two, and notice the benefit themselves. And then, then they're more likely to stay on a plan. But yeah, I usually don't recommend that people do something and then just not follow up, here is your plan. I think having that feedback and having sort of an aspect of coaching where you give someone a recommendation and maybe they're having a little trouble implementing it, then you can troubleshoot some things because maybe you just make this small shift here and that still works. But when you're given a list of recommendations, it can be overwhelming because you're just like, well, I have to switch my life around. But really, it's really just do this for 2 weeks and let's check in. And how did it work for you? And then, kind of planning accordingly.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about the food combining recommendations that you would give for people?
Yeah. So essentially, it's pretty simple. There's a lot more detail, but we could simplify it with keeping fruit separate from your main meal by at least an hour before and 2 hours after. And that's because fruit is considered easy to digest and almost pre-cooked by the sun. And so if it's sitting with something that's difficult to digest, like a heavy protein, then it's going to digest faster. The different rates of digestion are going to be different, and it's all going to be sitting in the stomach for at least an hour or two. And then one product will start to ferment because it's already been digested while the other one's still going. And so then that fermentation and acidity travels throughout the gut and leads to more toxicity, more ama. So food combining is very important when you are trying to lose weight, to keep your fruit separate. So don't be mixing fruit with your oatmeal or fruit on dairy yogurt. Fruit's okay to mix with nuts or nut-based products like nut milks, but I wouldn't put like berries with your pea protein or bone broth protein in a smoothie with spinach and bananas and all of that. Just it can be very overwhelming and confusing for your digestion, as well as the additional fermentation. There are some arguments that, it's all been blended into a liquid, so it's easier to digest anyway. So in those cases, I would just have someone have that unique experience, that feedback for themselves and see what happens. So if they're on a strict weight loss goal, if they have a strict weight loss goal, then I would say take it out. Let's make things easier for your body to eliminate toxicity and not be accumulating new toxicity. However, if they're a really strong pitta constitution with great digestion and they don't have any issues and they don't get gas and bloating from mixing food like that and doing improper food combining, then they might just continue it. So it's really just unique to that person how strict they want to be based on their goals, and they can also look at their tongue. My sister texted me the other day and she's like, I heard other Ayurvedic practitioners on Instagram say it's okay to mix fruit with food. And I think she was just looking to me for like a yes pass for that. And I was like, I don't have all the answers. Why don't you test it for yourself? Have berries with your oatmeal or whatever, and then see your tongue the next day. If you've got a thicker coating, then you know that you didn't digest it well. If you don't notice anything, then maybe you're okay to do that right now. But if your digestion were to weaken, you get a GI infection or something else triggers your immunity, then you might not be able to digest that same combination. The other big thing in food combining is keeping your protein source just limited to one protein source per meal. So rather than having, like the typical Tex-Mex meal, which is beans, cheese, and chicken, for example, those are all protein sources from different types of different sources. So either you just have legumes, either you just have animal protein, or you just have dairy. And I'm not making a blanket statement that anyone should have all of those individually, but just don't combine them.
And I think that interestingly, if we start to listen to our bodies and become more just in tune with how we respond to different things, either by keeping a little food journal or something like that, usually your body is revealing so much to you. And sometimes for me, I just realized like, wow, I just wasn't listening.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of just kind of experience that can really inform our weight loss journey or inform our ideal diet, that just comes from really listening to how our body responds to things and becoming more aware of those things like, intestinal distress or even irritability, fatigue, things that a lot of times we don't associate with the foods that we're eating, but a food journal or something like that can be very, very insightful because you start to be able to draw those little connections between, oh, I had a really big meal last night, or there was a lot of different foods all being combined, and then I woke up today just feeling my emotions down in the dumps, and et cetera, et cetera. So, so much from just bringing more attention to ourselves and letting our body really be a stronger resource rather than just
just rather than in reaction to something.
Yes.
You're looking for the wisdom within your own body and the feedback that it's giving you, and then acting accordingly. And yeah, I think food journals are great. One thing I would say is that if you're doing more of an elimination diet type of protocol, just the way you feel that day or a few days after is not a long enough time. For example, you should chart your symptoms for 2 weeks.
Okay.
For say when you reintroduce gluten, and I think that could be a fallacy that a lot of people make, is that they're like, oh well, I had dairy and I didn't feel anything. I'm fine. I can eat it. But it's more like, wow, okay, you had dairy. Did you have worse allergies for the next 2 weeks? Were you more prone to nasal drainage congestion? Because it is thought to be very mucogenic. So yeah, it's not just an immediate effect. It can be, and it can be the day after, but sometimes the symptoms actually show up over the next week or two.
And I think also there's the component that the longer you've been eating the food and then just living with the symptoms or reactions and not maybe even noticing them, like people who just feel, oh, I'm just irritable, I just have that personality, or oh, I just don't sleep well and I never had, or I've never had clear skin and I just don't have that. We start to kind of accept the different aspects rather than maybe seeing them as those clues towards actually helping our body to get into that ideal state of balance where all of those little symptoms will start falling away, even though maybe that wasn't what you set out to try and resolve. Or maybe you didn't even realize that that was an issue that could be resolved simply by changing your diet or lifestyle.
Yeah, the way I describe it to patients is that when you have a muddy stream, if you add another muddy boot or a muddy piece of thing or just a rock, it's not going to make a huge difference. You're like, okay, the stream's already muddy. But if you have this clear, beautiful stream, even one piece of dirt or a handful of mud makes a big difference. You see it. And so I think about our body that way, that the more we cleanse our body and get it into this state of balance, then we're going to be more attuned to even slight shifts away from balance.
Definitely. And certainly with the, recommendation of elimination diets, kind of to help clear the stream so that you can observe how things affect you. Getting back to that idea of, excess weight as storage units for toxicity is kind of how I think about it. When somebody does start to detoxify the body, we often hear about detox symptoms like headaches, irritability, things like that can result. What recommendations do you have for people? For somebody who maybe has a lot of excess weight and they're starting to detox, recommendations to help reduce some of those negative symptoms that can come when people start a cleanse or detox program.
Yeah, so in Ayurveda, the three main pathways of elimination, mulas, are sweat, urine, and feces. And so keeping those pathways flowing is really important. And so that would show up as maybe you add in some type of laxative that could be in the form of magnesium, or maybe the trifla is enough, or even charcoal, some things to help with the detoxification through the gut. And then making sure you're drinking enough hydrating liquid. So sometimes water isn't hydrating enough, but you can add a pinch of sugar, like natural sugar like maple, coconut, even honey, and a pinch of salt, and that helps to reabsorb the liquid. That's just based on our physiology with sodium, potassium channels, and the way that water follows sodium, and you hydrate better when there is that addition of sugar and sodium and glucose channels. So hydration, and then even detoxification through sweat. So that could be an infrared sauna, or it could just be Epsom salt bath where you're getting your body temperature up and you're sweating, or maybe it's exercising where you're sweating. But having all of those pathways flow is going to help with detox symptoms. And then sometimes I'll actually slow the cleanse down if it's too harsh for someone. Right. Then you want to protect the individual as well, not just reach an end goal. So it's really working with that patient to see what can their system tolerate, and coming up with something that is going to be maybe not the most comfortable, but at least not have a lot of prolonged negative effects.
Right. Can you talk a little bit more about, you had mentioned charcoal, and I guess I would maybe think about like bentonite clay, things like that are often used to, I guess, help draw toxins out of the body. What specific things you would recommend?
Yeah, so there is a brand in particular that I like. It's Biocidin is one of their formulas, and then they also make a GI detox formula, and it has some activated charcoal and some other, I believe, like liver cleansing herbs, things that assist with detox. So that's something that can be purchased on the internet. And the brand itself, like the overarching brand, is Biobotanical Research.
Okay.
So a product such as that is both doing some liver detoxification, some colon detox, something like that would be good. I don't see any problem with the bentonite clay. Some people have kind of more severe detox reactions when they start the clay too, just from taking clay. So that might not be a primary choice to get started with for detox if you're already going through a cleanse.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're definitely right that the detox process, as much as you can, just kind of mitigate those unpleasant symptoms is really a good way of helping, keep the person feeling positive and feeling motivated to keep up with the program. Because I've definitely seen people who get so kind of maybe overloaded with that surge of toxins that it kind of plummets them back into that, kind of emotional rut that that keeps them eating those same foods and, keeping those same habits that created the condition.
Well, there is a really nice light at the end of the tunnel when you get through the detox part, and that part can vary for a lot of people, but some people it's just a few days in the beginning, maybe a week max, and other people it lasts for a couple weeks. But I can speak firsthand, from cleansing some of the dysbiosis, that the mental clarity that comes, it really is just like crystal clear thinking and an intense sense of will and a magnified sense of willpower and kind of feeling like you can do anything and be anything. It's a very kind of awakening to your own divinity. You feel powerful. I think it's when we clear out all the junk, we kind of get to the truth of who we are, and it's working on so many levels, on the physical plane and in the emotional plane too. And I'll tell you, with an Ayurvedic detox, it's important to be in a very meditative state when you do that. Like, try not to have a lot going on. You really sort of seclude yourself as much as you can from other people and the outer world. And it's a time for introspection, a time for journaling, a time to purge anything that you need to purge, any thoughts, any feelings, any emotions, any patterns, any people in your life. It's a time to detox from all of that and then create this new you.
Definitely. So, in addition to the, kind of chemical, physical toxins that we want to detox from the body, you had also talked about that emotional toxicity can also contribute to accumulation of excess weight and difficulty losing that weight. Can you speak a little more to that?
Yeah. I think that there is a strong emotional component to holding on to excess weight. It's in some ways it can be a barrier, like this is my buffer, but in some ways it's also just like that that emotional toxicity that is being stored. And I think it's things that are unprocessed. So emotions, thoughts, feelings, events that are unprocessed, that haven't been processed and fully felt and released into understanding, into the purity of understanding and love. And this touches on kind of a deeper spiritual layer to cleansing in general, and maybe onto an outlook for life as like events that occur, traumas that we experience as things that we can use as a tool for our own learning and for our growth, and for us to help other people in the world also learn and grow that have shared similar experiences. And I guess creating a sense of freedom from our past. And I feel like people are often trapped with what happened to them, how they were treated as children, how their relationship between their parents, other people in their life, traumas they experience. And it's this trapping, the sense of the self that gets kind of paralyzed almost. And that is a big part of that's a big part of holding on to, right? We're holding on to weight, but we're also holding on to something that happened to us, a sense of identity that is being defined by events and people and things external to the self, rather than the identity existing within the self and then that being kind of shined out. So it's not to minimize anybody's trauma or minimize anybody's experience or their past and say that wasn't, or actually even say that it's the cause of their obesity. But I think it is an important perspective and aspect to look at when we're thinking about healing and we're thinking about releasing and detoxing.
And I think that It's definitely a common, trend, in Western cultures that we don't come out right with our emotions. In a just kind of daily social level, we generally tend to, want to put our best face forward, as they say. And a lot of times those emotions or traumas, we're kind of encouraged to keep to ourselves. I think perhaps just looking at the cultural difference of, being kind of encouraged or just too scared to voice our emotions, talk about our emotions. You had mentioned earlier that we just want to, I think you said, process them into love, or that we're just looking at the emotion enough that we can think through it, we can assess it, we can let go of the pain associated with it, rather than as we're kind of bottling things up, that pain becomes so innate and just such a kind of crutch almost that, that concept of staying in our comfort zone, sometimes the comfort zone is clinging to those painful emotions and is not letting them go or letting them come to the surface so that you can come to terms with them. And definitely in a culture that also at the same time makes us feel like we have to look a certain way or be a certain way or be happy all the time. It's kind of this, kind of contrast of the two different pressures that I think makes people feel so helpless in a lot of ways.
And I mean, again, I think the focus is, it's a long journey for, and many people spend their whole lifetime going through it, learning it, and learning it again and again and again until they finally get it, and myself included. But what I really think is that it's a return of the focus and the perspective to you versus what someone thinks of you, So whether that's their society or is creating an ideal to then evaluate, are you okay or not? Or whether you're you're not expressing your emotions because societally that's not okay, well then just change your society. Because I feel like you'll always find someone, and that's not even necessary, but when people begin to speak up about how they truly feel, they might, scare or be considered to be a certain way or given a name or something by people at large. But why do we care? Like, why do we care what a bunch of other people who are disempowered think? Like, we are all disempowered in some ways, broken in some ways. So why are we looking to someone else who's incomplete and broken for our sense of completeness? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, I would say, just feel what you want to feel. And if the other people around you are not supportive in that and they can't remain supportive or come around, then they're not your people. And life is something that's always changing, and we're always in flux as people. If we're not growing, then we're dying, right? Or if we're not growing, then what's the point of living? So we're always changing, and it makes sense that the people around us will change as we change. Either they'll grow with us or they'll grow apart from us. That we're constantly on the search for a better version of ourselves, a better sense of balance within ourselves, better health, all of that. But to what purpose, So it's just, why do we care? To what purpose does it matter what society thinks when we have an outburst or when we're upset? The way I think about it is a child, they don't carry any baggage around with them, because if they're grumpy or if they're angry or they're sad, they'll just express it in the moment, forget about it. They're not thinking, oh, I probably, I'm so ashamed. Like, shame doesn't exist in that level. And I feel in a lot of ways, it's a return to self. It's a return to that childhood self of ours where we can fully express something and we're not worried about what people are thinking. And we can be whatever we want to be. We can express ourselves in whichever way we want to express ourselves. We can have those dreams sort of ignited, and it's not about how it's received. And I think so much of sort of the socialization of the individual and the growing up into adulthood is the suppression of that inner creative, really expressive child. And I know that we all have to function, we all have to kind of play our roles, but I think there is room for more expression and less concern about what other people think.
And just giving our own emotions an outlet to be expressed, and embracing those things that make us unique. In the culture that we live in of social media and all of this, I think a lot of times, people are only posting the best of themselves. And unfortunately, that creates this kind of disparity between what life is really like for people and what life appears to be for certain people. And certainly for someone that is, kind of fixating on those, self-judgments, or trying to compare themselves to other people or attain a so-called happiness that it appears another person has, is just another kind of symptom of the culture that we're living in, and keeping people kind of stuck in wherever they are. So recognizing that, the more that we embrace those things that make us human, rather than trying to silence them or quiet them or ignore those emotions, is really, really important, even if it doesn't necessarily fit into what, we believe is the ideal or whatever. Because unfortunately, the ideal that's often portrayed is, I think, just unrealistic. And I think it's important that people understand that it is natural that we're changing, and it is natural that we experience these different emotions, and to really accept that and accept ourselves where we are. I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today. I really hope that you will come back and join us again soon.
Sure.
And maybe even join us over on the Psychetruth channel to share more information. You had mentioned in the previous podcast that meals that contain the 6 tastes are the most satisfying. So I'm wondering if maybe we can even do either a podcast or series of videos, maybe showing some examples of those meals.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So thank you again for being here.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm actually having a 6 cent soiree tomorrow evening.
Okay.
And I have maybe 20 people coming, and I was thinking about the 6 tastes because I'm representing kind of a dessert platter of the 6 tastes, and it's been really fun to create it and think about it. And I have pomegranate seeds for astringent, and I have bitter dark chocolate for the bitter taste, and I'm just representing each taste, but also the 5 senses. Ooh. And so I also do sound healing with holographic sound vocals. So it's thought to be channeled vocals. You kind of step out of the way and let whatever healing sounds want to flow through. So that's going to be really fun with a crystal bowl. And then I have a few other people helping out with aromatherapy and color therapy, and then we've got the taste and it representing each sense. And so the idea is that we heal through our senses, and then that ignites the heart. It ignites the intuition, the 6th sense. So
I love that.
So yeah, I'm excited about that.
Very cool. That would make a great podcast topic in itself, too.
Okay, yeah, sure. I can tell you how it went, and then we can follow up from there. I also really enjoy just thinking about these concepts, on the mental, emotional, spiritual level. And so I do have a small book of poems that I created, and they just kind of came through last year. I wasn't really identifying as a writer or poet, but but that's available on Amazon. It's called Drops of Gold, Poems for the Modern Day Enlightened Woman. And it's dedicated to all women that believe in miracles, because I feel like it was a miracle to write it. And so if anybody's interested in checking that out just for kind of more inspirational words, then that's there too.
Yeah. And I love that. Kind of reminds me, I can't remember if it was this podcast or the previous one, that sweets are kind of in the language of love or whatever. And oftentimes when we're craving really sweet foods, that if we can address that need for love in another way, like reading a beautiful, inspiring poem, that can actually even be a way that we satisfy a sweet craving without actually eating sweets. So I love that concept.
Yeah, it's really just thinking about what feeds you. How are we fed? And I feel one of the biggest ways that we're fed is when we're in a creative place. And you don't have to be an artist or a musician to be creative. Maybe it's how you create the meal for your family, or how you create space in the day for yourself for a deeper nurturing or relaxation. But anything that kind of shifts you out of the norm, shifts you out of your daily routine, where you kind of shift something, you create something, you do something different. It's what ignites our spirit. And so that's another really great way to feed yourself when you feel hungry. When you feel hungry for food, you may actually just be hungry in a different aspect of your life.
Wonderful. Well, this is fascinating. I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And I look forward to having you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Certainly. I want to thank all of you for tuning in to the podcast today. You can learn more about Dr. Khanna by visiting NishaKhannaMD.com. You can find the full 1-hour interview video version, along with hundreds of other health and wellness videos over on WellnessPlus.tv. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you will join us again soon. We're the only country in the world that separates the mind from the body. Yeah, the only country. I'm joined today by Athena Jezik, Ed Nordit, Robert Gardner, Dr. Paola Bruno.
The body has a natural ability and tendency to want to heal.
It doesn't have to be complicated or costly.
I can talk science. Yeah, we'll talk science for sure.
You do often need to supplement with magnesium. Unbalanced life.
Vitally important to make sure that the entire system is opened up.
Actually, happiness and suffering are states of mind. They're not external things.
Do you have any recommendations for our listeners?
Use a tennis ball.
Vinyasa or Hatha yoga.
Try a HIIT workout. You only got to do 20 minutes.
Every day, having a practice for yourself.
We're not powerless, right, to improve our situation.
Welcome to the Wellness Plus podcast.
Introducing Yoga Plus, offering a free series every month with over 300 different videos. Take control of your health. Work out anytime, anywhere. Yoga Plus. Download now for free.